forecasting.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to this week's weather briefing. This week we have Ben Repert from the meteorology department here at Penn State. He's going to be talking about January and what we have ahead of us, any storms that we might be getting anytime soon. Take it away, Ben.
All right, thanks, Andy. I had quite the treacherous trek from my office. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. Compared to last week, it's obviously much more wintry this week. But before we talk about the here and now and going ahead, since I always seem to pick these or get these around the end of a month or the start of a new month, we'll just quickly remember January here. So I'm not sure that there's still a day to go into this yet, but obviously it's not going to change too much. But I highly doubt that a lot of people had this as their January outlook, just thinking back to when all the winter forecasts came out. But pretty similar picture to December. A lot of warmth dominating from the Mississippi on eastward, and that big cool pocket, very cold, or much colder than average, up across the northern Rockies over into the western Dakotas, and then the interior Northwest has really had, particularly the first half of January, they had quite the month. It seemed like Portland had an ice storm every week this month. So it's been chilly in January, where it was essentially chilly in December, and warm with respect to average in January, where it was warm with respect to average in December. So a similar temperature pattern from December. Precipitation-wise for the United States, January was generally wet. So when you get into the second level of green, that's essentially normal, and then above, so all the blues and the purples, that's above average in January precipitation. Then the yellows, the oranges, and the reds are below average. And you can see, with the exception of some pockets in the central and lower Mississippi River Valley, and then parts of the Northwest, January was pretty moist across much of the United States, contrary to some of the recent months, which have been relatively dry for a majority. And of course, California, the storm barrage, they show up. Almost the entirety of the state of California has had at least 200% of normal for January, and some spots near the Sierra have had 400, 500, 600% of normal precipitation for January. Snowfall, it's been kind of the haves and the have-nots. So while it was essentially wet everywhere, it was not, in fact, a lot of it did not fall in the form of snow, at least with respect to average. The West has done just fine this month, and then up into the northern plains. Chicago, O'Hare, they measured 0.6 of an inch of snow all month. Average is around 11 or 12, so they have not done well in the Midwest and down towards, again, the central and lower Mississippi River Valley. The strip of snow that went through the southeast shows up nicely. And again, the West has done just fine. Closer to Pennsylvania, on the whole, much of the state had a below average snowfall month for January. Of course, today we'll go into this for some places. So it may change particularly, it would change a little bit essentially in the western part of the state. But January on the whole was not very snowy in Pennsylvania. Areas up near in the lake belts didn't actually do too bad. But the area from essentially York, Harrisburg, and then up through the Lehigh Valley Poconos and into interior New England, that was the snow drought, so to speak, for January. Areas down toward the coast, South Jersey, Delaware, Maryland beaches, with that storm that affected southeast up into the coast around the 10th or so, they did okay with respect to average. Now let's talk about this storm. So last night, this was the WeatherCom's collaborative effort for this storm that we felt good about enough to go on the air. In general, fairly well-behaved storm. We definitely got toward the higher end here in State College, 3.6. I hear from our Minister of Truth, Bill Syret, barring whatever else falls from what's going on outside. But some other totals that I came across: Seneca, which is essentially near Franklin, 5 inches. Penn Hills, which is near Pittsburgh, 1.7. Wellsboro got 2. Raystown Lake, 2.5. Stormstown got 3. Someone out in the Scotia Range measured 4 inches. So in general, central and west of this map worked out okay. There was actually an area, once you got east of the mountains, we've actually had some subsidence, some divergence at the surface today. So eastern areas of the state did not do quite this well today. Overall, though, the behavior of the system seemed to be pretty well handled. But for once in State College, we didn't get into this GIP zone, so to speak. So we look at what's happening right now. Here's what the radar's been up to. First thing this morning, if you were up early, 6, 7 o'clock, and you took a glance at the radar, even a few frames before this, it actually looked very unimpressive. But then, just in a couple of hours, we've got a southeast flow at the surface. That's an upslope flow, and some of the as the Fort Max and the actual air flow pressure got a little bit closer, and that combined with the southeast flow, that radar definitely filled in. Had a couple of good bands come through here, essentially around the time that I'm sure a lot of you were trying to make your way in. It was snowing pretty good at times, but now I'll animate this, and you can see a couple of things here. This area from the Susquehanna Valley and over into eastern Pennsylvania, this initial band went through, but a lot of that was actually Virga. The air mass in eastern Pennsylvania as opposed to western Pennsylvania last night was a little bit colder, a little bit drier. So there was some extra moistening to do in the east. And then for much of this storm, as a bit of a coastal low attempts to organize, very weak albeit, but there's been this area of subsidence through much of the morning in eastern Pennsylvania. Got some air going up over here, air going up over here. So in the middle, we've had air going down. So that actually hindered some of the snow across eastern Pennsylvania. As far as the rest of this afternoon, this lingering area of moisture, it's starting to collapse and look less impressive, but we're not done yet. Obviously, the snow is not going to be as productive as this morning. Our temperatures have come up a little bit. Actually, there were a few points where you could actually see the sun a little bit through the clouds. Not very well, but it was definitely there. So I think the accumulation, for the most part, at least here, is done. You can see how they're still adding a bit to it. Some of the ridges are down into the Laurel Highlands here, but you can also notice that it's warmed up enough in the extreme southwest corner that there's actually some raindrops or some drizzle falling here at the end. So for the most part, the accumulation part of this storm seems to be winding down. So I suspect that our 3.6 here is essentially a storm total or close to it. So for a change, a fairly well-behaved system for State College, which is not something that we can often say. Visible satellite imagery from the last few hours. There was actually decent break in the clouds that snuck into southern Pennsylvania a few hours ago. Places like York, Carlisle. There was more of sunshine than there was clouds for a couple of hours. It actually looked like a pretty nice day for a time. Temperatures there actually are pretty close to 40 degrees right now, so not a bad day in the extreme southern tier of Pennsylvania, but otherwise we're shrouded in these clouds. And if we look upstream, there's still quite a bit of cloudiness to get through, so I don't think that's going to change a whole lot here. This afternoon, once we lose some of our upward motion, I suppose there could be a few breaks if the precipitation lets up, but in general, we've got clouds for the rest of the day today. As far as this is this SPC mesoanalysis, and this is showing these values here, not the filled in areas, but these values that are either red or blue, which there are some of. That's convergence, the red, divergence, the blue, and that just kind of shows that if you look closely, there's a small circle here of surface divergence associated with that clear slot in the radar. So that's essentially where we do have some subtle, of course, very subtle, but indeed there's sinking air in eastern Pennsylvania, which has been hindering that snow. And then meanwhile, we have this other area of snow that's starting to take shape. Southern New England over toward Boston, they're going to get a few inches of snow this afternoon too, as another weak area of low pressure attempts to get its act together enough to the southeast of Rhode Island. So that's as far as how this storm seems to be behaving. So looking at this is the latest GFS. Pennsylvania is essentially in a battle zone of sorts between the really chilly air, which is not very far to our north at this time. 850s down here. I mean, it's not a bitter air mass, but as far as delineating the chilly weather that we're having, which is not far from normal for February versus some anomalous cold, that's hanging out off to our north and east. Actually not too bad of an air mass down across the southern plains. It was in the 70s yesterday in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. So it's pretty mild, not too far to the south, pretty chilly, not too far to the north. And we're kind of in this zone where we're right in between the two. That's an area where disturbances can travel, although we're going to have a few over the next few days, but they're not going to have the chance to have a whole lot of moisture to work with. So going forward in time, through the rest of this evening, we'll still have a few of these snow showers to deal with. They'll tend to collapse, but then with a westerly flow and a half-decent air mass near the Great Lakes, there will still be some snow showers and squalls. With enough low-level moisture around, it's not really, at least in Pennsylvania, a true lake effect. It's more lake-enhanced or some upslope action in the Laurel Highlands and toward the Northwest Mountains. This blue line here, that's the -10, 850 line. So at least the air coming over Lake Erie is somewhere between about -5 Celsius at 850 and -10. So it's really not the best air mass for a lake effect event. As we head into the day on Wednesday, this is 24 hours from now. This is 18Z tomorrow. That -10 contour does get closer to Lake Erie, so there will still be some snow showers and squalls, but nothing very organized. And the lake belts of northwestern Pennsylvania could still add a couple of inches on top of what they've gotten so far. Then a little bit later this week, Thursday appears to be a day where there'll be a tendency for less in the way of snow showers, simply from the standpoint that the wind direction is the wind is actually going to relax a little bit and change direction. So there will still be some snow showers in the northwest on Thursday. The air mass actually gets better. You can see that we now go below -10 at 850, but the wind, we actually just have less of it, and it changes directions just a little bit. It's more perpendicular to the axis of the lake. Later this week, we're also going to be seeing a bit of a wrinkle in the northern stream that's going to start to work down on Friday. So if we go ahead to Friday, this is 18Z, there's a little bit of there's a vortex here. Notice though the surface reflection of any type of low is actually well out ahead of that. Just given this general look, and also the fact that this is about 72 to 84 hours out, I could see how the position of this does change a little bit. So for later on Friday, it wouldn't shock me over the next couple of days that we have to at least allow for some snow showers. With this thing in the northern branch of the jet stream, still very chilly. Fridays into Saturday is probably going to be our coldest set of days. The 5-10 thickness line is not very far away. We're about -15 to -20 at 850. So Friday into Saturday is going to be the chilliest part of this week. The lows will go back into the teens probably for a couple of days. We probably won't get to freezing here. So definitely feeling like you can expect early February to feel. Area of high pressure is going to come over the top on Saturday. So this is a little bit faster, and we don't have wind on Saturday morning. Saturday morning could be quite cold, pretty cold at 850, and if we can lose our wind, could have a nice radiational cooling night Friday night into Saturday. But regardless, it's a chilly time. There's been chatter about a storm around Super Bowl Sunday. A couple days ago, a lot of the models were much more enthused about the idea than they've kind of gone to now. First and foremost, with a high pressure system going off the East Coast, the Gulf in a pattern like this is at least more open for business. It's not a true open the Gulf for business. Paul Knight used to have a good rule that if you could get 3 isobars turned out of the Gulf of Mexico and into the southeast U.S., that was his definition of opening the Gulf for business. So here you can see we've got kind of 2 isobars turned out of the Gulf. So at least there's the opportunity to get some moisture involved for a storm on Sunday. But as far as the players aloft, you can see there's a disturbance tracking through the center of the country. It's trying to gather some moisture from the south, but there's, at this point, a lot of the models, and even the European and the Canadian, have now essentially agreed on a similar look that a disturbance in the northern branch, and an attempt at a disturbance in the southern branch, but not really working together in a constructive way for Pennsylvania. I mean, in a solution like this, you'd still have some snow and probably still decent ratios coming off of a chilly weekend, but at least compared to a couple days ago, the chance at a more notable storm has gone down, but there's still time for this to wiggle. It's one of these situations where if a northern branch feature is more dominant, it's probably some sort of just weak thing going by, some light snow, patchy. If we can get the southern branch more involved, then we can still leave the option on the table for some more snow late on Sunday. But with high pressure, at least for now, looking like it'll be off a little bit near the East Coast or off the East Coast, and some moisture having the opportunity to come in from the Gulf. Sunday is still a time to watch. At this point, it doesn't look to be anything sizable, so I could still see how there'll be patchy snow around Sunday one way or the other. It's just a matter of if there's anything more than patchy snow on Sunday. And then beyond that, the next surge of cold is actually going to, it looks like, be directed into the Pacific Northwest. I'll actually get out of here. We'll look at the GFS ensembles. This is the spaghetti on the right. These are the height anomalies on the left. And if we go ahead to, let's start on Sunday. So I make this a little larger. So if you look closely here on the image on the right, this is valid Sunday afternoon. For being 5 days out, the certainty here is not awful. There's not a lot of discrepancy among all the ensemble members. And you can see a tendency for a very weak disturbance here, kind of in the northern branch, which is essentially what a lot of the models are showing right now. And if that's the case, again, we still need to keep our eye on Sunday for some patchy light snow or something else, but there's a good bit of agreement on this at this time. The coldest of the cold, again, is up to our north and southeast Canada. Not a bad air mass down to our south and west. So again, we're going to remain in this general transient battle zone of chilly but not awful for February. Then as we go into early next week, as I mentioned, it looks like there's a tendency for the next shot of cold air to be directed toward the Pacific Northwest. There's going to be some more disturbances that start to affect the Northwest, and it'll be cold with respect to normal. What this actually allows, though, is as we get toward the mid part of next week, out around day 8, day 9, heights are, should this happen verbatim, it gives the opportunity for heights to rise a little bit toward the center part of the country, and these disturbances that are going to start returning to the west coast, this next disturbance by early next week will probably be directed into the plains. With the main dip in the jet stream that would be out across the center of the country, our flow here turned southwesterly. A look like that, while we could have some antecedent cold on the front end, it might be one of those, might have some front end stuff, but verbatim, a pattern like this would tend to promote next week a storm more so going into the middle part of the country. And then following that, of course, it's still a long way out, so this is nothing obviously set in stone, but right now it looks like a storm at the middle of next week. We might warm up out ahead of it, probably to rain. And then in the wake of that, there's some indications that we might then get into another shot of cold around here by later next week and into the following weekend. Just in terms of a general pattern. So again, while it's not, it's still a long way out, but the tendency is that for now we're in the battle zone. Looks like we may try to warm up to rain for a storm middle of next week and then get chilly again. But even looking at this potential cold shot later next week, again, this is not your true cross-polar flow look. If you trace these lines back, they're from the northwest, but there's still a lot of Pacific air mixed in this look. So while it does still appear as though for the first half of this month will generally be more chilly than not, it's not brutal cold. And given the fact that we're, by this point, almost to mid-February, the chances of having our coldest week or coldest period of the winter, it looks like everything verbatim, it looks like we may have already had our coldest period of the winter. Of course, we had the one shot leading up to Christmas. We had the other shot that was in the first 10 days or so of January. So I can't quite remember which one of those was by the numbers colder, but I would be willing to bet that the way things look right now, our coldest shot with respect to average of the winter has probably happened, even though this is not a warm look going forward. So that's, as far as our weather, that's about all I have. I'd watch out for, first off, I'd watch out for late Friday night, just with, I'll try and get ahead here, but Friday night or late Friday, with a disturbance that's in the northern branch, and we're on the business end of some trough that's not far away. I can actually get ahead enough here. Yeah, this disturbance right here that starts to shoot down our way by Friday. With that to our west, and if it has enough oomph to it, late Friday, I'd still watch out for the chance at some snow showers. With it being cold, maybe it could accumulate a little bit. And then Sunday, I'd say the jury's still out as to what exactly happens, but patchy snow or possibly more, depending on if some Gulf moisture can get involved. And then another storm middle of next week that at this point is looking like it might be a warmer one. Details if there's cold for front end stuff yet to be up, but an active pattern. So in the next week, probably about 3 disturbances to watch out for. But details in a pattern like this still a little iffy, but that's about all I got. Anybody have any questions, comments?
Thank you, Ben.
No problem.
Is the groundhog going to see its shadow?
I think, well, the only thing I can say for certainty is that I hope Phil has some extra fur on for Thursday. I don't know how he did it last year. But, yeah.
Ben.